I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're sharing a powerful and uplifting journey of advocacy, parenting, and the pursuit of independence. We're talking about a heartfelt book. It is called The Right to a Full Life. It is written by a terrific author. Her name is Dorothy Fickenscher, and she chronicles in the book the challenges and triumphs of raising twins, both with disabilities, in a world not always built for inclusion. Through humor, honesty, and practical insight, she shows us how love, community, and determination can transform limitations into opportunities. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her amazing book. The links are below this interview. And be sure to download the Spotlight Network TV app streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. Dorothy, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you.
Great to have you on the show. This is an uplifting book written very positively about what some might feel was a burden to have not one but two children who had special needs. Tell us a little bit about your journey when you first realized that your children weren't going to have a typical life.
I found out first with the birth of my daughter, because with Down syndrome, you find out right away, basically at birth, or in my case, within hours of birth. And my son, I did not know until he reached school age, which is typical when you don't have a genetic disorder. He has Tourette syndrome. We knew something was wrong, but we didn't know what the diagnosis was. And when he found out, he was relieved because he knew something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was. I was pretty upset when I found out my daughter had Down syndrome, because I'm not somebody who was excited about having somebody who in my family or having a child with a disability, but I had to get over myself, because once I realized that my problem was me, not her. I think I really wanted to sort of relive my life through my daughter, sort of be the perfect vessel for overcoming whatever I didn't do as a child.
Right.
But once I realized that as long as I tried to help her be all she could be, there were resources out there, and all I had to do was to try and help her. It changed my view, and actually, my life has been richer and fuller because of, not in spite of, my children. I have met people I never would have had the privilege of meeting before, because having special needs kids is a gift that just is across the board. There are all kinds of people who share this experience. And actually, I will say each day is a gift. I have certainly had challenges. I won't deny that, but I have learned from them, and I have grown and been a better person for it. I will say, however, that the importance of community, and I have prospered because from the very beginning, I've had communities that have come together to support me.
Yeah. Just knowing you have a shared experience with someone else makes it a little bit easier, right? That they're going through the same things. I mean, moms and dads often share the milestones with other parents and so forth, but your milestones are different. So sharing that
It
with
is true.
someone, yeah. So sharing that with someone who's going through sort of the same thing or maybe exactly the same thing is helpful, right?
Yes, it is, and it has helped me in many, many ways. When Elaine was born, it was social workers who reached out to me, or actually it was the Lamas, the people that before you have children, you go to classes and you learn about things. And when someone called to see how I was doing, and they found out I had a child with Down syndrome, immediately they called others to talk with me. And that was the start of a journey that at the beginning was so helpful, to find other people who were in the similar situation in my area who were sort of grappling with what do we do? How do we cope? And I was lucky because in my area, my children were born in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., the Children's Hospital had March of Dimes, and March of Dimes said, "Hey, we can help you gather some people together and you can talk." And that really helped. It
Hmm.
helps to, first of all, commiserate.
Yeah.
It really helps to share. But from there, to learn what the resources are and then to pursue them. And to be quite honest, sometimes people would call me thinking that somehow I was a placement officer or I knew something, but it was just sharing information.
Right. Right. Is grieving part of it when you have a child with Downs and you weren't expecting that? And like you said, you want that child to be everything that you weren't in life. I mean, we kind of impose that on our children sometimes. And now you realize that your child's going to have limitations or
If
possibly
I
have
had
limitations.
grief, it was short because everyone in my family kept saying, yes, it's a tragedy. She has Down syndrome, but she's not a tragedy. Her
Right.
life was celebrated.
Wonderful.
Um, when she was baptized, when my children were baptized, her godfather was our priest, and he held her up in the air and he said, "This is my godchild."
Wonderful. Wonderful.
It's hard to grieve when so many people are celebrating.
Yeah, yeah. And also, it's wonderful that everybody was so embracing. I actually have a friend who has adopted multiple children with Down syndrome and has raised them and, loves them immensely. And that's one of the qualities of children with Downs is that they seem to be extremely affectionate and extremely loving.
Well, yes, they can be, and they can also be very stubborn and so forth. But I remember someone called me when my children were very young and said they had got a diagnosis that the child they were expecting was going to, through amnio, was going to have this extra chromosome.
Mhm.
And they didn't know what to do, whether they should abort or whether whatever. And I said, well, if it helps you at all, you ought to know that there is a waiting list to adopt children with Down syndrome,
Mm,
because just what you said. But you ought to remember that every other chromosome is the one shared between you and your husband. And so they
yeah.
they called me back and they said, no one else is getting this child. But then the
Wonderful.
child was born and the child had no genetic abnormalities,
Hmm,
because at the time, genetic testing was more an art than a science. These
gotcha.
were back in the 80s. So, you know,
Yeah.
they were glad they had their child.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's your advice for someone in your situation? Either they've had amnio or genetic testing and they realize they might have a child or will have a child with Downs, or they've delivered and they have a child with Downs. What would you say the first steps are that the mom and dad should do?
I would say one thing to do is, if especially if you're in an area where you don't know anyone, is to call the National Down Syndrome Congress,
Mhm.
because they have resources. They have people in your area who will be happy to talk with you about all sorts of things. I know that at the beginning, my little girl had a tongue that was always protruding.
Mhm.
She had her tongue lolling out of her mouth, and we were concerned.
Mhm.
And somebody had suggested, not a doctor, thank heavens, but
Mhm.
somebody had suggested that we ought to alter the size of her tongue. And so I called and they said, well, we don't recommend it. We think with exercise, she will learn to keep her tongue inside her mouth, but we will let you talk to people who have done it and people who have not done it, and
Mhm.
you can make up your own mind. And the people who had done it found that it didn't change anything except for its painful
Mhm.
operation. And the people who had not done it said, oh, well, with exercise and speech therapy, everything went well. And we decided, well, my daughter's going to be 41 this week, and she
Mhm.
does not have a protruding tongue at all. And that wasn't a problem after she was 5. So
Right,
we're glad we never did it.
right.
But
But that's why
the
it's important
National
to speak
Down
to the
Syndrome
experts. Yeah.
Conference did a great deal with helping us.
Yeah, that's what it's saying. That's why it's important to speak to the experts. So that is terrific advice. Talk to people who actually know, not your neighbor, not your sister-in-law, or whatever the case might be. Everybody's got advice on raising kids, and it can be overwhelming to any parent, no matter what the health or well-being or the situation with their child, let alone a child with special needs. To get all this sometimes unsolicited advice is more harm than helpful. And you're absolutely right, get in touch with the folks who know, get in touch with the professionals. I have to ask you, because this went through my mind as we were talking, is obviously your daughter needed a lot of help through schooling and other groups. Now that the National Education Department is basically being dismantled, um, are you fearful for other parents whose children are in a similar situation that are going through school right now, that they might not have the resources that
Oh,
your daughter
yes.
had?
The the there are two groups that are at risk right now, not just children in school, but those who have transitioned to adult services, because adult services, with all the attacks on Medicaid, are also at risk. It's it's really a scary time right now.
Hmm.
One thing that, let me back up.
Sure.
When I go, I like to travel, and when I travel, I always end up talking to people because I'm a single person. I
Mhm.
always end up talking to people around me, and I end up talking to all kinds of Americans, and sometimes they're from very small towns and rural places. And this past year, I was in, where was I? Was in Florida, and I
Mhm.
was talking to people who are about to take off on a cruise, but they were from a small rural southern town.
Mhm.
But it turns out they had in that town, she was the principal of a school, a middle school or a junior high, but she had one young person in that school who had a special need. They had no extra special resources in that small town. But as we talked, she became relieved, because I said, but your community is supporting this young person, correct? And she
Mhm.
said, well, yes, this is, and she started to outline the things that they were doing to support this person in terms of job skills as well as education, the kinds of class support he was getting. And I said, this is important, because this is what will make this person have the skills and have the ability to live the life he wants,
Mhm.
because he's most likely going to stay in that area when he leaves school.
Mhm.
And you're building the kind of network of support he needs as he moves into the adult world, so he doesn't have to only rely on his parents. And she felt so much, she said, oh, and I can think of other things. So I think what we need to start doing now, if we're not going to have the federal funding, is to try and build the networks of support that will help. But there's no question that this is devastating,
Mhm.
because it's much better to have the assurance that where there is no support, there will be.
Mhm.
We have no guarantees now
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this disappearing.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And, Ronald Reagan was one of those advocates also of slashing government, but he always said that there has to be a safety net for the truly poor and the truly needy. And people like your daughter fall into the category of needy, not financially needy, but she has needs and needs to be supported, perhaps, like you said, through Medicaid and so forth, or others in similar situations. So hopefully, the right things are done, and America finds its heart to make sure that the people who need a little extra help and care and love find it. What's your daughter's life like now? She's 41 years old, you mentioned.
She had, well, in 2014, she decided that she wanted to move out of the family home.
Hmm.
And I purchased a condo in our area,
Mhm.
someplace close to where the center of our suburban area 2 blocks from the town, quote, the suburban town center.
Mhm.
And she moved in. She has a non-disabled roommate.
Mhm.
She's on her third. They roommates last 2 years, but to 3 years. But this one is somebody who's really lovely and will probably last much, much longer.
Mhm.
She has 2 part-time jobs. She has a very full social life. And, she can't earn too much money or she would lose any benefits that she has, but she lives a very full life and she's very happy.
Mhm.
She knows the people in her community and they know her, maybe not by name, but they know who she is. And that's what keeps her safe. But she has a community that has hung together. She left high school in 2005,
Mhm.
but she still keeps together with the kids the young people that she went to high school with,
Mhm.
because one of the mothers started a program in her church and they get together at the third Saturday of every month.
Mhm.
And of course, that's grown as they've aged. And so the boyfriends and the girlfriends and everybody else comes together, but it's wonderful.
Yeah.
So she has many circles of friends, including our church. And at that church, which has helped raise her, remember I said they raised her
Yeah.
up when she was baptized, she carries the cross. And this church is in a very affluent part of Washington, D.C. We live in the suburbs
Mhm.
now, and she carries the cross that leads the choir in.
Mhm.
And so it's a mutual thing. When people come to our church, maybe shopping for churches, you know how people are,
Mhm.
they see a person with Down syndrome leading the choir in, and I don't know what they're thinking, but they
Mhm.
always say, well, we have to reevaluate this church because it's not unusual. It's clear that this is a normal thing. So
Mhm.
maybe we ought to check this place out because they are very accepting. And
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Churches are a community that can be so helpful to anybody in any stage in life, especially people who are going through some hard times or have challenges or need some empowerment. Um, it sounds like you found the perfect church in your congregation, huh?
it has certainly helped me. And
Yeah,
we've been there for a long time, but it is a church that's helped me, but it's also helped others. We are not the only,
sure.
it is a wonderful community,
Yeah.
but it is one of many communities that have reached out. And I will just say communities are very important and they're important in numerous ways, but you have to work and build one.
Hmm.
When my daughter moved out, I wasn't sure she had the skills to expand her community because when you live in a community, people move away.
Right.
In 2014, with 4 other families, I helped set up a nonprofit to help people like my daughter who wanted to move out into their own places, build communities, and have the support they needed, maybe life skills, whatever, so that they would be as independent as they could. And that we started with supporting 4 young people, and now we support 40.
Wow. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Is there a name of this organization? Is there a way other people?
Integrated living opportunities.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's great. Giving back to others is such a wonderful feeling as well, and empowering other people, of course, is a great feeling. Let's talk a little bit about your son. Is Tourette's something that can be treated or that there's some kind of cure or medication for? I worked with somebody who had Tourette's. It was very minor. He would kind of like almost like make a clacking sound every now and then. But I know
It is
there's.
something like a virus that comes and goes when you have stress. So in school, where you really have to conform, you sit in desk and you conform and you do things, it was much more pronounced.
Mhm.
And his tics were nose blowing. That was what he did. He blew his nose all the time,
Hmm.
driving teachers crazy. But he didn't have an allergy and he didn't have a cold.
Mm.
He managed to survive school.
Yeah.
I would say I was a teacher. So we like to teach squares, triangles, ovals, and circles, but he
Yeah.
was a trapezoid. And, people tried to shave down his sides to fit one of their shapes. But once he got out of high school, don't you know, you can find a college that has some people like him, and it worked.
Hmm.
Um, he is now a IT specialist. He was able to get a degree in a BA in computer technology, and he works for Dell as a contractor. Um, he trains people who go way beyond him, but he is very happy. He did not move out until I sold the house.
Uh-huh.
He's completely different from his sister in that way. But once he moved out, he called me and he said, I should have done this a long time ago. But he's happy. He has his place. He lives about a mile from his sister in the same community. They're both about 10 to 15 minutes from where I live. And he is her handyman,
Hmm.
but he's a slob. So she goes over and cleans his place, puts her hands on her hips and says, "My brother." So
Wonderful. Well,
they
it's
they
great that they
are,
have a great relationship as well. That's
yeah.
rewarding. Yeah. Wonderful. Let's talk
So,
about your book title, Right to a Full Life. What do you mean by that?
well, I think I'm originally titled that because so many people thought that Elaine, my daughter with
Mhm.
Down syndrome, would not have much of a life at all.
Mhm.
But actually, my full belief is that every one of us and everybody has the right to live the life that they want. And I mean that to be even young people. When in 2014, when we set up this integrated living opportunities, it was my hope that even people who had fewer skills than my daughter, and my daughter is not the sharpest pencil in the box,
Mhm.
even people without a whole lot of skills, if they wanted to move out of the family home with the appropriate accommodations, they should be able to do so,
Mhm.
because every day is a gift and they should be able to live the kind of life they want, whatever that is,
Yeah.
as long as they're able.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
I agree.
So
Very, very important.
that's
It's part of being
that's
a
their
human,
full
right?
life. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, how that is depends on the accommodations they need,
Mhm. Yeah.
but it is possible.
Yeah. Wonderful. That is a message of hope for sure. We talked a little bit about how the faith community helped you and how schools and educators have helped. What about the medical community? What was your experience like working with doctors and so forth?
I'm not sure what the problem was, but when Elaine was small, it was difficult
Mm.
getting past the gatekeepers to the doctors. Once the doctors saw her, there were no problems.
Yeah.
But it was really hard. I mean, there is a time when she had no, well, I don't know what kind of pneumonia she had because she had so much trouble breathing. And we were in military medicine at the time. So I was in the clinic and then I was in the emergency room. You could hear her trying to breathe down the hall.
Mm.
And be, before COVID, people didn't know, but her dad had heart problems. So I knew about blood gases. So
Mm.
I persuaded some poor young intern to test her blood gases. And this is important because just at the time that they were so furious at me for taking up their time in the emergency room, the head doctor in the emergency room got the MPs with guns drawn to escort us out of the emergency room when the guy with the blood gases came up and tugged on the head doctor's thing and showed him the results. And he goes, "Stop.
Mm.
She's in respiratory distress." Well, I hope to shout. You could hear her struggling to breathe. And so at that point, everything stops. they start treating her and they said, we need to do a spinal tap. And I said, wait a minute. I know this is a teaching hospital. If you give her oxygen and it doesn't work, you can do a spinal tap.
Right.
But this child needs oxygen. Let's give her oxygen.
Right.
Then, if that doesn't work, do the spinal tap, but no testing on this child until you treat her for what she obviously needs.
Right.
So she was treated for both types of pneumonia. She was hospitalized for 5 days. But that's now, fast forward. Once she turned 7, everything changed. I don't know what happened, but she got to see doctors. She got, right now, when she was 11, she woke up screaming. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I didn't know what was wrong, but she refused to stand. We scooped her up, took her to the doctors. Her hip had spontaneously dislocated. Turns out that was the only hip that could dislocate. She had no hip socket on the other side. So we had to create a hip socket. They had to, the hip ball was like this frozen, so they had to do this. So she's going to always be short because then they had to stop the long leg from growing. So she's going to always be 4'8". Her brother, however, remember they were twins, is 6'4". So they're always a different size. But once she turns 7, if she says she doesn't feel well, they deal with it. And they deal with it wonderfully well. They're, they pay attention to her and all that. But when she was a baby, I always heard, get used to it. It's Down syndrome.
Yeah. Maybe the attitudes of doctors have changed. Maybe that changed during the course of her life.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Maybe they viewed her more as a thriving human being by the time she was 7. It's hard to get into somebody's, as they say in court, you can't get into somebody's brain and understand why they treat you, why the way that they do. The good news is they're treating you better now. And thank goodness she had a smart advocate in her corner in you to make sure she wasn't given procedures that she didn't necessarily need. Just have a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you, are you thinking about writing anything else now that you've written this wonderful book?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm 80.
Well, you're a very young 80. I had no idea, but not that you have to stop doing anything at 80, particularly if you're a young 80. But this book, you poured your heart into it. What was it like writing this book? Was it cathartic? Was it an emotional journey? Was it empowering because you knew you were going to empower others?
I'd say it was empowering, but it was fun. It refreshed me to go back and look at it.
Exactly.
It was interesting. At first I was like many of my students had been. I just wrote and then I read it and I said, boy, you didn't put the context in there. Nobody will know what you're talking about. So I had to go back and reframe it. Yeah. But mostly it helped me realize how far we'd come, both as a society and just my kids.
Yeah. Yeah, we have come a long way. Hopefully we don't take a step or two back with what's going on right now, because people do need help. People do need support in all stages in their life, whether it's your run-of-the-mill kid in public education or a child who might need a helping hand in special ed. We all have built this huge community. It's called America, and we do try to support each other. Some people have it easier, some people have it harder, and we all kind of shoulder the burden together. The name of the book is The Right to a Full Life. It is an amazing story written by Dorothy. It is her true life story, of course. She chronicles the challenges and triumphs of raising twins, both with disabilities, in a world not necessarily built for inclusion. Through honesty, humor, and practical insight, she shows us how love, community, and determination can transform limitations into opportunities. Dorothy, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you. I loved it being here. Thank you.
Loved having you on the show. I appreciate your insight and your wisdom. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time, this time until next time on Spotlight.